Hello everyone, this is Camera Flips, the best place to buy and sell used camera gear. This is episode number 6 of A Photographer's Life, where we talk to the people that made the pictures we love. My guest for today is Ross Dettman, a phenomenal photographer based in Chicago. Ross built an enormous amount of experience at several incredible shots, covering the top sports and music events, as well as collaborating with the most important fitness and sports brands. His images are the perfect encounter of in-depth technical ability, careful planning, and a unique innate creativity. Serendipity only adds to the quality of his work. Ross is a true creative, and he sees every crisis, especially this one, as an opportunity to rethink and redefine the boundaries of his craft. His passion for photography provides him with an endless stream of ideas that are painstakingly recorded on his notes and later acted on. The perfect antidote to any photographer's block and a source of inspiration for anyone who struggles during this difficult time. Let's jump right into a conversation. Okay, we're live, episode number 6 of Photographer Life. Today, I'm very excited once again. It's a privilege. I saw some of his pictures. We had a common friend, and when I saw his work, his wealth of experience, and the things that we can talk about today, I'm super excited, and we have so much to cover. Ross Dettman, it's a privilege for me to have you on. For the few people that don't know you, if they're based in Chicago, because you're sort of a figure in Chicago, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your experience and what you do.
Okay. Again, my name is Ross Dettman. I am a still photographer, primarily still. I dabble a little bits in video, but for the most part, I'm a still photographer. Before I was a photographer, I didn't go to school for this. I'm not formally trained as a photographer. I went to school. I began as a business student. I realized that wasn't my thing, and I switched to engineering. Felt like that wasn't my thing either, but I thought I got to get out of school at some point. So I finished up with an engineering degree. I worked in engineering for about 5-7 years after graduation, somewhere thereabouts. But at the same time, I had learned when I was in college that I had this penchant, a passion, and as well as a skill set for photography. I went to a school that, when I was a kid, I had dabbled in playing hockey, and I really enjoyed the game. The school I went to had a hockey team, and they didn't have a lot of other things going on. They had a hockey team, and I enjoyed that. And I felt like, well, a way I can contribute to that, since I couldn't play that well, was through photography. Because I looked around and I thought I wasn't happy with the photographs I was seeing. And so I began doing that and realized at the beginning I really wasn't very good at it, but I also understood why. And I was able to figure that out, and I was able to put myself in touch with the right people. And it kept developing, and eventually the school began hiring me. And then the kind of light bulb went off, like, well, this is kind of interesting. But I continued doing the engineering thing as well, just because it was stable. But I also knew I had to keep pursuing this photography thing. I had to sort of see where it went. And so I did that. And then there was a point where it kept developing. I switched engineering jobs, but kept developing. The photography thing kept going. By this time, my wife and I had twins. So I had to focus a little bit on stability. But she was super supportive, understanding that I had this passion, that the long term for me wasn't going to be as an engineer. And, fast forward to a point when I was having one of my review interviews with my last engineering employer. And they said to me, we like what you're doing here, but we also understand you have this passion for photography. So what do you want to do? Do you want to be here? Because we want to elevate your role here. Or do you want to pursue this photography thing? Normally I would sit down with my wife and talk about this. But I'm in the middle of this thing, and I feel like I have to answer the question now. What I did know, one of my clients had just acquired a license to cover the NFL, a trading card company, and I kind of was able to project what I thought that was going to be economically. And with that information in my back pocket, I said to them, I want to be a photographer. And so I realized at that point, my career there as an engineer was over. And there was a little bit of ambivalence, like I'm literally taking a very safe thing and throwing it away for something that I know a little bit about, but I don't really know a lot about. well, fast forward beyond that, and they were super cool. I ended up staying there a couple more months. Even today, some of the people I work with there are incredibly supportive, and applauded the fact that I made that decision. And I haven't looked back. Like, I've definitely had some bumps in the road, but at the same time, when I look at the wealth of experiences I've had, because of I've shot a lot of professional sports through my career, and I've often been at things having incredible access that other people are paying substantial amounts of money to be at. Super Bowls, Stanley Cup Finals, World Series, Final Fours. I've had these from a sports perspective. I've been incredibly lucky to have an incredible wealth of experiences that I would have not gotten, in any of my other possible career choices. So, yeah, that's about the long and short of it. And so I continued the photography thing today, and I think I officially began it in 1994. So I've been at this for a while. I think through that time, 9 Super Bowls, 6 Stanley Cups. Somewhere on the desk behind me, there's an Emmy from a job with ESPN.
Wow.
I've had it's been pretty extraordinary. What gets me the most is every day, and there's no exaggeration here, every day is different. There's things that you don't even anticipate coming up, the kind of assignments, where you end up. It's just, and I like that opportunity for such extraordinary variety in what you do is so refreshing. I can't overstate that.
I think what is fascinating among creatives, they're often presented with the dilemma that you were presented to. You were very good at your job. You had this other passion that was sort of on the side. It was about to take off. You have all the elements, but still was a huge risk. And even in that case, it probably wasn't a snap decision, although you follow your heart, you follow intuition, and you were absolutely right. And I feel that many people are in the same situation of living something that it's safe, especially now. And I think it's a good moment to discuss that, especially now. People are like, I have this passion. I'm also very good at it, but also very good at my job. And I'm lucky enough to maybe have a job. I've not been furloughed. I've not been fired.
Right.
I still have an income. But as you said, that variety, that ability to enjoy every single day in a more meaningful way, I would say in a fuller way, that it's something that most jobs, most sort of standard jobs will not give you. If you're lucky enough to have that, that's probably not looking elsewhere. I would say, obviously something happened in the end of 2019, 2020. The COVID-19 epidemic really made an impact and affected most of photographers' life. What was it for you? What did you learn from that? And how are you coping or even thriving? What are the strategies that you are employing
Sure.
under this scenario?
So, sort of a sidebar to what you're saying there, some people have, and I've thought about this as well. Had I stayed in my traditional career path, I probably would be making more money. I just think engineers just generally are paid well. But I think there's a bit of selling of one's soul when they do that. Like, I think there's a lot of people, to your earlier point, they stay in a safe job, whatever that means, because it's just that. It's safe. It's predictable. I think a lot of people have a fear of the unknown. And they're not risk takers. One of my very good friends who does substantially better than me financially, he applauds me all the time for the fact that because we went to school at the same time. We were in a very similar program, and he went down that more traditional path. It served him well, but his stress factor is a lot higher. The kind of things he has to deal with, the nonsense he has to deal with, is stuff that I wouldn't even want to be thinking about right now. And there's a freedom that I have to express and do things in that, and I'm not beholden to other people in that same way. So that's a thing. So that's one thing. When I encourage people to, if you have this desire to do this and the conditions are right, at least put your foot in the water. Take that, because it's so easy to look at the same thing 10 years down the road and say, I wish I had done this. Like, fortunately, I didn't have to say I wish I did it. I did it and I experienced it. And the thing is if this really, really failed, I could have just jumped back into that lane again. It's not like once you stop being the engineer, that's it. They tear up your diploma and you're out of the club. And that was a thing. And obviously having people around you to encourage you as well, having a support system, people who want to see you succeed. So even when there's bumps in the road, they're not going to say, hey, see, I told you so. They're going to say it's a bump in the road. Just get over the bump. So coming back right up to your point about COVID, in a weird way, I've had some downfalls in a career, economic downturns, 2007, 08. There's a big thing that happened here as well. that first big thing that I was working with that card company, things were going exceptionally well. We were paid better than anybody else in the industry, as far as I could tell. Great support, had a great relationship with my editors. I was getting the best assignments. It was all coming together beautifully. But that company overextended themselves. They didn't manage their business well. And a couple of years into it, they went bankrupt. And they went bankrupt owing me tens of thousands of dollars. And so that was the initial first punch in the gut, because I'm still getting my feet underneath me. And I'm very beholden to them, all the eggs in one basket kind of thing. I'm very loyal. And then that happened. And so I'm forced, and when that stuff was all going down in that same period of time, it got very, very rocky. I actually did consider going back into the real world, as I call it. And I thought my wife would applaud that, because it would bring some more stability into our house. And she said, well, it's getting hard now. So now you're going to quit. And so that's kind of all I had to hear. And so I moved forward on that. Now, fast forward to 2019 and all this. So we've been up and down. What's happening now is not a completely new experience. And so with the previous experiences like this, I didn't look at this. I don't look at this with any kind of fear right now. I really try to see things in terms of opportunity. It's easy. It takes no creativity to say, oh, it sucks right now. What a crap situation I'm in. Wow, that's easy to say. What I think is a little bit harder to say is, okay, despite all of the crap that we're going through at the moment, is there something positive out of this? And I think that's just a positive attitude. And for me, I think there is. I was comfortable in the kind of things I was shooting. I enjoy them if they come back, because that's a big ad. We don't know, because so much of my career now has been in high-level sports and high-level entertainment. And both of those things are furloughed until further notice. And even when they're coming back in really obscure kind of ways. In the States, baseball's coming back a little bit, but it's not the same. And so I think the opportunities are going to be far more limited. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, I always keep a list on my phone of ideas. I'm always thinking about something. That could be kind of cool picture-wise. This could be a cool picture story. This could be yada, yada, yada. And so when this all happened and all these things were going away, I was just watching like dominoes, all these opportunities until August were just dying off. Number one, I didn't personalize it. Like some people say, why is this happening to me? Well, who says it's happening to you? It's just happening. Now, how do you respond to it? And so for me, I'm going to those other ideas and I'm saying, given the circumstances, what can I explore here? Like, what are the opportunities this presents? I already know it's taken away, but what's available? And so that's what it's been. And one of the things is I live in a destination city, Chicago, world-class city. And amazingly, through the years, I've explored it like almost none. I'm always going somewhere else to do something, or even when I'm here, I'm focused on shooting a sporting thing, and that's it. Now I've got this time, and the streets were more wide open, and it was easier to get into the round of the city because of lack of traffic. So I just began exploring the city visually. And I've been finding that, people are really enjoying these images. And so now I'm going to keep going down that path. A couple of side projects have emerged as a result of this exploration. I'm working with some artist colleagues to develop these projects. These are things that could not have happened if I was in the middle of my previous photographic life. So that's what I mean about finding opportunities. They're always there. You just got to look for them. It's the cliche, when one door closes, another door opens. It kind of feels that way. Like I am just as busy as I was with my normal assignment work, developing these other projects. But I'm doing things completely on my own terms, which is amazingly freeing. So I'm actually very excited for where these new projects are going to take me, because I think there's going to be some cool things here. And then when and if the other stuff comes back, my career is going to be even richer than it was 6 months ago.
I want to put this on hold for a second, because this is incredibly interesting. And you're not the first one that mentioned that this COVID-19, reframed in a certain way, represented a new creative burst, a new push forward. Sometimes you need to, go backward, to then be able to jump to newer heights. But I would like to sort of, again, go back in time and show the viewers, I will say, I'll start with one picture that you took that I think it's absolutely phenomenal. And it must have been, even from your perspective, like from a hockey fan, the ability to take this shot, it's absolutely fantastic. So let me see
It's a good one. I'm happy with that picture.
Let me see. Can you see the screen?
I can.
I mean, this is amazing. It's that moment of full exaltation, and I can see the hockey stick flying over. Stewart is jumping over. Tell us where were you? What did you feel? How did you imagine the shot before taking it? I think it's
So this team, they're a team in the American Hockey League in Chicago, and they're called Chicago Wolves. And anyways, I've been working with them since they began in 1994. That was another one of the things that kind of popped up at that same time. So the point is, I had the NFL thing and I had this. I had two things emerging at the same time that was a good launch to the beginning of the career. So the gentleman in the gray suit, his name is John Anderson, and at the time he was the head coach. And when this was happening, this was their fourth time they were in a position to win the championship of the league. At this point, it was called the Calder Cup. And it was also going to be, he was moving on to the NHL. And so there's a couple things that went through my mind when we set this up. So this is a remote. I had 3 remotes, I think, set up in the arena that day, then 2 cameras on me, and I had 2 people assisting me as well. So it was, we had a variety of cameras, a variety of angles, and so on. Anyways, the championship before this, I had set up a camera on the opposite side. I'm sorry, I was on the opposite side coming out like where it says Comcast. There's a penalty box over there. And I wanted to shoot the energy of the bench when the team wins, when they're coming off the bench. A couple things happened is players are getting away on the ice and you're just pure luck to get a clean shot. So I set up a remote camera up top, but I was thinking that's a safe picture. And I was walking around the arena with one of my colleagues who was assisting me that day. And I had one more body to set up. And I said, okay, I want to do something different. Like I did the safe cameras. I want to do something different. And so as I'm walking around the arena, I said, this is Johnny's last game. And the one thing I don't like about an angle from across the ice is the coaches kind of get lost behind the launch of players. And I said, I want something where the coach, like the guys behind the bench are as big a player in the photograph as the people in front of the bench. And so as I walked around, I was just kind of visualizing. We're there hours before the game, which is normal when you're doing something like this. If the game's going up at 7, we're probably in the building by about noon. Yep. And so I'm just walking around with this one more camera. And then, it's like an epiphany. I'm like, I says, Dale, get me a ladder. I have an idea. And so we had the clamps and stuff like that. I go up there and I had a fisheye because of, I knew I wanted to get the entire bench. And I'm now just visualizing where people are going to be. I know the coach is going to be here, and I'm looking, I can see in the upper right that the scoreboard will be up there. So if the team wins, the score could be up there. I know it's going to be a full house that night, so I can see the sweep of fans. It's just all kind of coming together. What I was actually imagining, though, is that there would have been players in this lower part of the bench, and that would have been great. I would have been happy. I was expecting sort of a vertical launch of players, and they'll kind of go off, which is common. But Serendipity kind of jumped in here as well. And Colin Stewart, who's a good friend of mine, number 23, he, for some reason, he decided to get up and jump off the bench, which is a ridiculous thing to do. That's a great way to break both ankles. But he didn't, and we've talked about this. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. And so when that happened, and I saw the photograph later on, one of the other guys was assisting me. We're in the locker room shooting all the post-game fanfare, and he's like, you got to see this photo from the remote. And by this time, I'd kind of forgotten about it because I'm just in the moment. I got a million pictures to make that night, so I'm just shooting like crazy. But he didn't have to worry about that, so he's like, I'm going to take a look at the remotes. And he's like, you got to see this photo. So I saw it, and I was like, oh, my God. And then I was like, and then I talked to Stuart. I'm like, what exactly was happening there? And so then when I blew it up and I looked at it, I thought, oh, my gosh, like, everything, it's here. The stick in the air, there's another stick in the air, the line of players, like kind of echoing the curve of the boards, this curve of players going to the net. You got the range of celebration everywhere. You've got because I know there's going to be celebration at the net, but you got the guys who are still on the bench celebrating, the people making their way. There's curves and lines all over the place. The score showed up the way I wanted it to. Stewie in the air, just beautifully filling in this spot. It's like things were kind of placed in spots where if you were drawing it, you said, I think it'd be kind of cool to put a hockey stick up here. It happened. And it was like, and then you got, the dejected players from the other team. it just all came together. And it was one of those kind of things. It's like, I knew this position was going to yield a solid photograph. I didn't realize it was going to yield this solid photograph. And so I'm super grateful that literally the last camera we set up that day was the best camera of the day. This is my favorite hockey photograph that I've ever been involved in. Absolutely.
I mean, this is, the more what I enjoy, having the opportunity to sort of understand the backstory, how you set it up, and then you see it's the more you look at it, the more you can appreciate other details. So it gives
layering.
It gives an immediate impact, and then you keep discovering these small little nuggets. And again, it seems sort of put together in a specific way. Well, all happened in a fraction of a second, and as you said, you were ready, and serendipity intervened. Do you think obviously you cannot fully control the shot, but you put a lot of effort and a lot of thought into that, and fortune favors the prepared, not just the brave. Do you think you have the ability to understand where an opportunity comes? Let me stop sharing and go back to us. Because of the different experience, you are a trained engineer. You told me that you also worked, closely with an architectural firm. So you have the ability of looking at a possible shot or a potential subject from many different levels, many different angles, due to the breadth and the wealth of things that you have experienced in your life, and that gives that creative edge. So not just being a photographer.
I think so. I mean, people are going to bring different experiences to things. But I tend to, now I didn't do it in this particular frame specifically, but I tend to look at the environment. Like backgrounds are important. And so I tend to look at, like what I was saying before, when I was looking around the frame, I'm looking at what the background is, what the environment is. I want to make sure that I'm trying to control the corners. I'm trying to see the whole thing. But then I'm also sort of just visualizing the process. So I'm watching as this thing is going to go down, and then knowing the game obviously helps. Basically understanding the likelihoods of things happening, and then kind of playing to likelihoods is kind of what came into play there. Letting serendipity sprinkle a little bit of magic dust on top of it was great. But a lot of the elements did basically occur the way I anticipated they would occur. If anything, I don't think it specifically goes too much in terms of architecture, other than maybe seeing if I could make the building interesting. That really didn't play as much as basically being analytical about it and looking at the components that would make up the photograph and thinking about how are those components going to occur and how are they going to relate to each other. And so the coach is celebrating. I anticipated that something would happen there, because that does happen. The players doing some sort of movement up, I anticipated that was going to happen. The part that gets a little bit more mysterious is, are the coaches going to be celebrating enough at the time when the players are making their way to, because there's things happening at the same time. The magic is these things were sustained enough that the players are making their way to so you got dual celebrations. You got the initial, yay, we won, jump off the bench, and then trail of players going to a secondary celebration with the players who are already on the ice, who are at the goalie. So you get this really cool line of players. So that's always a story about what they're doing. And the coaches are still celebrating here. Like I said, the thing about Stewart jumping in the air, that's just magic. That's not something anybody predicted, including himself. And so, yeah, that's a thing. But what I did do, I didn't just sort of randomly put the camera up. I did put it up, and then I basically, because I understood the game and I just how the game could flow, that gave me an advantage. Because the only thing that's really unpredictable there was Stewart jumping. The other things are going to happen at some point. There was a bit of magic that, because sometimes the coaches may start jumping off the bench themselves, and then it's not as interesting, because now their backs are to me. And so the fact that they stood huddled in that ball and they just basically jumped up and down, if you see the video, they literally just jumped up and down. And he literally did that long enough so I can get that line of players coming out. Because if you took that line of players out and you had the little group celebrating at the net, and then you had the guys just coming off the bench, it would have been interesting. But having the line of players out just adds a compositional component to the frame that I think is wonderful. I I couldn't have necessarily predicted that because it's a timing thing. There's two events going on. These guys celebrating and these guys stringing out to the net. Will they all happen at the same time to the extent I want? And it did. So there's always luck. There's always, when you set up remotes in particular, there's always a component of luck because you're near. Basically what happens in that situation, myself and one of the guys working with me, we both had a transmitter, and I wanted to create some redundancy. And so the idea is when that moment happens, when the game ends, the players are leaving the bench, I'm heading out to the ice to start shooting. He's somewhere else in the building. But the idea is I've asked him, when that moment happens and the transmitter in your hand, just hit the fire button. And all that's going to do is it's going to fire the remote. It's going to run the buffer because the moments can happen. You're going to go like 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, and it's over. The moment's gone. So the point is there's no thinking. We've already set everything up. Now just run it and give ourselves choices. He's firing, I'm firing, because the idea is sometimes when you're using remotes, you're firing, and Mr. Murphy comes in the room and says, I'm going to kill the transmission here, and then you get nothing. But when you have a second person firing it, at that point, you're creating a likelihood that you're not going to have a failure. And because I have enough experience to have been the only person there and have fired a remote at a key moment, and then I get back to the camera and it never fired. Yeah. This way, by us being in separate spots in the building, we're basically going to nearly 100% reliability.
I'm curious to ask you, sometimes people, maybe mostly outsider than insider in any craft, any creative craft, they think that it's just about intuition, talent, feeling the moment. How much, in your opinion, it's the ability to create something creative, it's preparation, process, effort, and how much is obviously the ability, the feel, the intuition, the natural talent?
Repeat that question for me, because I think I was going to answer. I was already thinking about an answer. Really quick.
Sometimes, and this is probably connected to, sometimes people, say they place some limitation. I'm asking this because people sometimes place some limitation in what they can achieve because say, I'm not talented enough. I don't feel that. I don't feel a natural connection with the certain things, right? Okay. Well, on the other end, especially in the creative things, the creative arts. While on the other end, if you say, well, okay, if you have a natural talent, natural predisposition, everything helps. But most of it is a predisposition to learn, right? And if you instead trust the process and like you are prepared technically, you have redundancies, you are able to set yourself for success, essentially. That sort of, on one end, anybody can achieve these results, and on the other end, which is sometimes the difficult part to accept, there are no excuses if someone is unable to get to that level. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts about creativity versus process, effort, training.
Well, I think that they all come to play. They're all ingredients in one great recipe, and sometimes some are going to take a bigger role than others. There's plenty of people I know who are they don't have a lot of technical prowess, but they're very creative, and they know enough technically to get by. But you can learn technical. I think creativity is an incredibly important part of it. I think I'm technically very strong because of my training, but at the same time, I also think that I really try to emphasize being creative and being open, just to that process, to being creative. There's a lot of people I know who, if they swing too far to the technical side, I think they're stiff. And the way they kind of approach things, they kind of adhere to, well, this is how things should be done. I've got some of my engineering friends who dabble in photography, and I feel that they're more rigid in how they think. Now, they will make technically strong photographs, but I feel like they put themselves into a lane, and they stay in that lane. And for me, I'm like, well, I'm in this lane for a little while, but what if I jump to this one? Or what if I combine these two lanes? Or what about this? And so I feel like a funny thing is the more I've been away from the engineering world, the more I've become like this. When at the beginning of my career, I was much more about method. When I first learned how to light an arena, put strobes up to light up hockey, basketball, things like that. When I first seen those photographs, they were magic, like like daylight. How could this happen? And then I learned the process. And so then I was very rigid about the process. And I'm like, well, this is how you do it. And then it took me a long time to do things like, well, what if I turn the lights off on this side, leave them up here, and I'm going to create some cool shadows? See, originally that wasn't part of the process. The process was create even light across the surface. And once I checked that box, I felt success. But as I felt like I wanted to dabble more, and maybe it was coming from boredom or something like that, then I think creativity is not about the process so much. It's just about kind of exploring what's in front of you. And I adhere to the process enough to make sure that I've got the most important technical details accounted for. But I don't adhere to the rigidity. And if I do adhere to the rigidity, then then a little bit of the engineering mind comes back in. How important is this adherence to rigidity? So I guess it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. There's some things when I'm setting up remotes, for example, the process is more important because now it's more about reliability. But maybe where I put the camera, or what I'm going to do with the camera, or maybe I'm going to drag the shutter or do something crazy different and all these other things. That's where I'm saying, well, the process is checked off. It's going to basically work. But now what can I do with this to make it different? Yeah. So I hope that answers it.
It does. And it's fascinating how, you see that, sort of people in the beginning phase of their career, their craft, said maybe they're more rigid about the process, but you see real pro or people with great experience that redefine the process. They know all the rules, and it's up to them to tweak some of them to get results that someone that, other people that are outside of that craft, of that domain, wouldn't be able to, because they are stuck in a certain list of categories and check boxes. But I think it's fundamental to learn the basics, that you master that, because only when you master them, you understand what is vital, how much is vital for that specific job. So creating those exceptions to the rule but because you have sort of interiorized the essence of it.
Yes.
Let me take the opportunity to sort of stay in the sports domain and show another picture that, again, it's iconic, and I really love it.
Cool. I'm happy with it too.
But for me, it's let me first share it and then we talk about for a second. You know what I enjoy of this conversation, that when I ask, as I asked you to send me a selection of pictures, and especially in your case, you have thousands and thousands of great shots, right? And it forces you to go back and look, of maybe what this picture mean and stuff like that. But for me, it's the very first time that I see them. And I am just amazed because, every photographer took some time to select this, to carefully curate sort of my experience. And you have just 2 to 3 pictures, like, to show. And you send me, and I'm blown away. And I want to know all about this one. It happened. It must have been something significant in Chicago, I guess.
Yeah, it was definitely a big deal. Yeah, it was like 2008, 108 years. So basically, this is obviously, you can tell from the Wrigley Field marquee that the Cubs won the World Series. And it's something that had not happened in 108 years. I think that's the longest anything like this in all of professional sports. And it was just a thing in Chicago. And in fact, the Emmy behind me was for a Cubs-related story that a good friend of mine, a writer, had created to sort of celebrate, or not celebrate, but sort of analyze the idea of the Cubs not making it. And it was a really cool piece. And so the idea of the Cubs and the lack of success in the World Series has been an ongoing thing for a very long time in Chicago. So anyways, I was invited to shoot by the Cubs team photographer, a very good friend of mine, to join his team because he likes my aesthetic, I guess, and he likes the way I see things, and because I'm going to see it differently. Because he had people in his group who were straight ahead photographers. And what I mean by that is, like, their job is to cover the game action. And so they're going to do that, and they're going to do that in that process-oriented kind of a way. They tend to work for wire services and that sort of thing. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's a need for that. But he already had those boxes checked. And so he and I had worked on a game earlier when I had proposed a photograph to him about how to cover a particular picture when the Cubs would win the NLCS, because that was an iconic moment as well. And the success of that photograph, he liked the way I was thinking. And then out of the blue, he says, I would like you to join the team to cover the World Series. And I'm like, yeah, I'm honored to do this. So anyways, first 3 games, they were in Wrigley. I'm sorry, the first three games, the three games I'm dealing with, there's three games at home. Unfortunately, the Cubs lose two of them. But game five comes along, they win. And they had to win. If they lost that game, then they were going to lose the World Series. So they won game five. And so we're leaving the stadium after we've done our edits and things like that. And I see there's a ton of people out in the street. And then the center occurs to me, it's like, wow, all they did is they didn't lose the World Series today. They're down. If they lose any of the next games, they're going to lose. They're down 3-1 at this point, I think. Two. And point is if Cleveland wins any of the next three games, the Cubs lose. So all the Cubs didn't do, they just didn't suck this game. That's really what it is. So I looked at that, and I knew that I wasn't going to the games in Cleveland, games 6 and 7. I wasn't going to those games. Through MLB rules, we could not get a credential for me because I had a picture ID out there. It was going to be very different, but we couldn't get a credential. So I was basically stuck staying home. And so game 6, I watched the game on television. There's nothing for me to do. But they win. So now it's a 1-game series. And so I thought, okay, it's game 7. What do I want to do? And I thought, well, in game 5, we had this almost religious moment out there. There were so many people out in the street. And I thought, and like it was like that. It's like, okay, I know the picture I want to do. And I thought, as I'm walking around, as I'm in the street, I'm thinking, well, I got to get above people somehow. So we inquired about getting me on top of this bar across the street, but that was Chicago police high ground. So we weren't allowed up there. That was an area that they wanted to make sure the police knew there was going to be hundreds of thousands of people up and down these streets. And that was high ground for them so they could make sure that things were orderly and people weren't doing things they shouldn't do. So we couldn't get up there. And I thought, but I need to create some elevation. And so, I have a technique that I can use to do. It's not a drone or anything like that, because that would have been highly not allowed with all these people, cops right there. But I knew I need to get above people because the picture that I felt I wanted, there's a number of things I wanted to communicate and photograph. And it kind of goes back to what I was thinking about the hockey photograph. I knew that if you almost thought of this as a religious moment, this is the temple. Wrigley Field is the temple. It's an iconic place in baseball history. The red marquee, everybody knows about it. People come from all over the place to take photos in front of it. It's a thing. And I also knew that, it always says Cubs win or something like that on the marquee, on the black part of the marquee, but it has never said in any of the people's lives here, it's never said World Series champions. And I knew that would appear up there. So I thought, I want those things. But then I also want to communicate as best I can without minimizing this and take into account the architecture around me. I'm in the middle of a street. There's a building behind me, so I can only back up so far. That I want to communicate this idea as best I can, people, and that this is a thing, and how many people are here is, again, behind me. There's way more people, but there's a point when I want to make a better photograph than just make a statistical photograph. And so, I'm up there, and so I've got my camera up. It's a remote kind of thing. It's mounted way above me, about 8 to 10 feet above me, something like that. It's all lined up. I know what it's going to be. I got out there like the 6th inning, so I'm in the middle of the crowd so that I can find my spot because I need to be in the middle of the crowd for this. And then I wait. And at that point, there's a guy who was next to me who was getting text messages from his friend kind of telling us what's going on in the game so I could keep aware of the flow of the game. And cutting to the chase, we get to the point, and he says, "It's it. We just won." Now my thing is, well, okay, now let's watch for the picture because it's right now kind of thing. So I'm looking at the marquee, and as soon as it goes World Series champions, I start firing that camera that's above me, getting choices. And then this guy with a sign, he gets up on his buddy's shoulders, and he's facing away from me. And then I'm thinking, well, I guess my pictures are done now because I've got this distracting component in that part of my frame. And I thought, but I can see the guy, and I'm like, well, he's rotating toward me. I wonder if there's anything at least somewhat interesting on his sign. And I was actually a little bit more like, I wasn't open at that point. I was more like, well, I'm glad I made the pictures I needed to make. And then he turned around, and the hair just up on my neck. I was like, you got to be freaking kidding me. Like, I couldn't have asked for a better sign. Now then, what's interesting about this is when you go back to game, I get this on my Instagram, back in 2016. In game 5, when I was there, I was kind of shooting like feature photos in the stands, and I made a photograph of a couple people in the outfield, and one of them had a sign that said, "It's still happening," And another person in the frame had a sign that said, "It's gonna happen." And then this happened. Like, I couldn't have predicted that. I could not have predicted that. It was when this happened, when this guy was there, I thought, I just made an amazing photo. Like, there's some times when I can buy into what I've done, and this is one of them. Like, when my thing was like, I just hope his eyes are open and all those other good things. I mean, he's moving super slowly because he's taking it in as well, because now he's got this like little elevated view, so he can really see the breadth of what he's experiencing. And when I made the picture, I was like, wow, I can't believe this. And then when it was done, and I kept shooting because I just wanted to make sure, I brought the camera back down. I was like, it's sharp, it's good, everything is great. I sent a photograph to Steve, who shot the Cubs winning the World Series in Cleveland. So he's there with the players. And he paid me an incredibly great compliment. He said, man, that's such an amazing, iconic photograph. I wish I had actually been in Chicago with you making that photo. And he's there shooting the Cubs winning the World Series. So that was and he's got he's been with the team for many decades, and he's incredibly experienced. He's been through all the highs and the lows. And it was an incredibly honor that I was able to make a photograph that rose to the level to inspire him to think in those terms. And I didn't see anyone else make anything like this. Like, there's a colleague of mine, you can see his camera in the lower left. He's on the ground like everyone else, but that's just not, I knew that wasn't the look. I knew that the picture that really was going to communicate this wasn't like a tight shot of the dude holding up the sign. That could be anywhere. For me, I wanted a person to look at the layering and see all this. Like, I was careful about placing the Addison sign because Addison's the Cubs street. Again, I rule of thirds kind of things. I wanted the marquee in that kind of a thirds position. The W's on the flags. I didn't want the street pole in front of the sign. So I wanted them, you can see the street poles, the light poles come really far out in the street.
Yep.
So my composition was very critical there. So I walked around that afternoon, kept raising the camera, bringing it down. Eventually figured out, put some tape on the ground where I got to be. So all the elements were coming together, and it just, again, serendipity. This has happened is the Colin Stewart of the last photograph. Taking some, it would have been a fine photograph without that guy. But you add that guy, and it takes another level. And then I thought, well, who is this guy? We actually found this guy a couple months later. Technically, he found us because somebody says, dude, you're in this amazing photograph. Because this photograph is in Mesa, the Cubs spring training facility, and it's in the club training room, and it's a giant, it's like 40 or 50 feet long. Steve told me it's meant to be this inspiration to the players that when you come into this space, that is why you're doing the work. And that's incredibly cool because Steve is a hell of a photographer, and he has made countless amazing photographs over the years. And for this photograph to at least rise to the level is an amazing honor. So it all came together.
I want to say you realize, you wanted that messianic composition and experience, right? You went down to the temple, the people were outside the temple waiting for something, to have a religious experience, like something that didn't happen for so long, and they were waiting for that, and that sign and that person sort of elevated in the crowd. It's it's really the word of a superior God to give his blessing to the crowd. So yeah, and I can completely understand your colleagues say, I'm in Cleveland, I am with the team, but I really wanted to be with the people. I wanted to be with the fans. I'm sure. And how did let's not think about it. You are a big fan, right, of the sport. You're a big fan of the Cubs. And how did you sort of maintain your composure during the shot? Because you must have felt, obviously you have a professional sort of character. You are there to do some work, but also something must be going through you.
That's a great question. That's a great question, because I talk to people about that all the time when I'm talking to people how to shoot sports. I'm very good at disconnecting, and the reason I'm very good at disconnecting, so taking it all the way back to UIC where I went to college, and the school has hired me, the sports information department has hired me to shoot the hockey team. And I remember one of them telling me, your action shots are solid. You've got good action shots of the players, but we never see any celebration shots. Why don't you shoot celebration? And I was like, I had to think about it. Then I realized, because I'm a fan and I'm celebrating. So I'm making a photo of the action, and then I'm the guy like, yeah, that kind of thing. And I realized you can't have it both ways. If you're going to capture the moment, you can't be part of the moment. And so I have learned over the years to completely disassociate myself when I'm in those moments. It's hard sometimes. Like I'm in the middle of some things. And I'm like, you know, you kind of get caught up. This is an amazing moment I'm part of, and blah, blah, blah. I just take a breath, and it's like, look, you have a job. Then I go into process mode. Then I go into pay attention to the details. And it becomes an effective distraction tool. Okay, your shutter speed's right. This is right. This is right. You just kind of go through that stuff, and it takes you away from it. And then it's like, take a deep breath. And then I really start thinking about process. Like I remember in that situation, I'm talking to people around me because people are kind of rumbling a little bit. They're excited. And I says, look, here's the deal. I showed them my credentials. I says, I'm with the Cubs. If you want to ruin possibly, and I'm making stuff up, possibly one of the greatest photographs the Cubs are ever going to have, shove me. And people are like, because then I'll ruin the photograph. Because I think my shutter speed's not very high because it's so dark there. I'm like 8,000 ISO. Wow. It's just a dark street. I can't light it. I literally have to go with the light I'm given off the street lights. I was shooting with a Canon 1DX Mark II, an 11-24 at 11 millimeters. So it's insanely wide. It's such a beautiful lens. But I just knew I'm like a 80th or 125th of a second. So just a little bit of movement, I'm done. It's garbage. And people literally were telling people around them, like, nothing here, no shoving here. Like they literally created a perimeter.
Bodyguards around you say, don't touch the guy. This is his deal.
Don't touch this guy. Like this guy can do anything. Just do not touch this guy. It was amazing. It was so freaking cool. So the thing is, I've learned to disassociate. And so what I do then is I'm just focused on, I'll have my moment to sort of look back at this and have my own private celebration. Because I have a greater responsibility, which is to make the image, not to feel the moment. And so I feel that and also if I'm jumping around and being a nut job, like I'm missing the nuances that are happening. Like if I'd been like, I'm going to shoot a few photos, I'm going to celebrate, I would have missed that guy with the sign. And so you relax yourself, literally everything slows down, and you're able to then see things. You're open to being able to react to the situations that are happening before you, because they sometimes happen so quickly, you can't know. And I am incredibly greedy when it comes to these pictures. I want every moment. And so there's no time for me to do anything but focus entirely on the pictures I'm making. And that's kind of what it is. I disassociate.
So you're happy to pay the trade-off of capturing an iconic moment, like in this case, and not living that moment.
Totally, because I get to live in that moment every time I look at that photo.
That's true. And many other people can. You know, if I wasn't there, but I can feel. I can feel an energy that you've been able to capture, and that energy is maintained in that frame forever.
Thank you.
And so it's really it's amazing. It's amazing what you can do with a camera. And so how did you like, I'm a curiosity, how did you use a pole? How did you manage to
So I have a very long monopod.
Okay.
Most monopods go to your chin, and then I have a ball head mounted on the top of this. And I've done this kind of thing many times before inside spaces, when I need to get some sort of an aerially kind of view, but there's just no practical way to do it. You can't fly drones inside many spaces over people, not to mention the fact that drones are incredibly distracting inside. And there's a certain element of danger. And so I've done that kind of thing before. I've done it for commercial clients where I'd be in a retail space for them, and they want to kind of communicate their space. I did this for Nike, for example. We're in one of the retail space. They had built a retail space for the Chicago Marathon, and they wanted to be able to communicate how effectively their queues were working. So that was more of a person gets in line, and within 7 minutes they're out the door. Like, despite the fact there's a zillion people here, they can do this. And I thought, okay, so I know I want to communicate this. I cannot do this from my level. But so often when you get above things, patterns begin to emerge. So I could see the queuing lines and all this stuff. And there's just kind of a beauty that comes out of it. Plus I can push back into the space, and I can see people mingling in all the different displays. And so that idea is in the back of my head. I try to think about the things I do photographically as tools in a toolbox. And so when I come upon a situation, I think about what are the tools I can employ. I try to define what are the problems, and then what are the tools I can apply to fix the problems. So the Cubs photograph, for example, was an extension of that idea from what I did on those previous retail kind of shoots. And again, I knew that if I'm at eye level, I can't communicate this. I just can't, because you can't see anything. But once you get above eye level, now you start seeing the pattern emerging. And I'm drawn to pattern as well. And so when I just raise that up, then I could, and I also feel like I'm pretty good at visualizing. I can get a sense of where people are going to fall into the frame. And then in that situation, from a technical standpoint, all I did was I just had, my monopod is exceptionally long. It's a really red stuff monopod, and it goes up to like 8 feet tall. It's insane how tall this monopod is. It might be the tallest monopod on the market, and I bought it with that in mind. Plus, it's also very, very rigid, so it's not going to be flexing and that kind of thing. And so basically, it's just that up, cameras on the end, ball head, so I can make a slight adjustment. I'm not looking into a monitor because I'm trying to keep this kit as simple as I can, and I'm in a crowd of people and I don't want things to get bumped. So what I do is I just use landmarks on the building. So when I raise it up, I finally figured out like how up and down I want it. I want just a slight, because I don't want a ton of sky, I want more foreground. So I get my angle set. So the relationship of the top of the frame to the top of the building, I get that set. And then the next thing I just have to figure out is like, where am I pointing it? And then when I'm in the middle of the street, no one's around, I know where I want the building to be. The people are going to fall where they are. I got my height set. I'm firing it. I've got a cord running down. This one I'm firing by hand as opposed to a wired remote, because I don't have to fire with a wired remote. I had both with me, and I had them both attached, but it was just easy to have a button right next to my thumb. And so that's up there. And once I aimed it where I wanted it, I looked at, well, what is my camera looking like? Where is it pointing? What's that visual landmark? So when I go back up there again, all I got to do is line those things up, and I'm ready to go. And that was it. And then I just stood there with this thing poked way up in the air. So I'm about, the thing, I basically got a fanny pack around me, a think tank fanny pack, and it's kind of like a person in a marching band where they've got the thing that holds the flag. I'm using it like that. So it's just sitting on there. So I'm not holding the weight. So I'm giving it a little bit of shock absorbent on this waist pack. It's balanced, maybe a little bit of the engineering mind coming in, because I do want to like reduce shock to it. And just sitting there. And then all I have to do is just, make sure I'm aimed, make sure my pole is straight up and down. So there's vertical lines I can look at to make sure I'm controlling my composition. And that's it. And then once it's, it's pre-focused, everything's ready to go. And then wait for the moment. And I would test it frequently. I was paranoid enough that when nothing was happening, I would test it just to make sure the camera's still firing and there's no idiosyncrasies. Because I've been burned by remotes enough times, and it's like, I just want to make sure the connections are good. I checked the battery numerous times. But the thing is since I knew where I wanted to line it, every time I'd bring it back down and then bring it back up, it was very easy to align it back to where I wanted it to be.
That's great. It must have been quite a scene, because if you, in the picture, there's a guy who's taking a picture of you.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I can imagine like you having paraded this around. It must have been interesting, even more than. And I'm just in my mind, I'm thinking that the guy is missing the guy with the sign. And so he's sort of distracted by
yeah, exactly. Sorry about, hey, that guy, I'm really sorry you missed that moment.
That's great. I mean, these were the incredible shot, the preparation, the technical ability, the composition, all these things that go together. And and then, the reward, an iconic moment with a sprinkle of serendipity. I want to sort of fast forward to, say, a more recent, and sort of to go back to, how, say, COVID, but you had different moments in your career, and every sort of creative had these moments. And I wanted to show a different picture that will appear radically different, but again, another range of emotion, and again, intrinsically beautiful, which is, again, I need to ask you, how did you achieve this? Let me see if I can put that on the screen. Okay. Is it still Chicago?
Yeah, it's Chicago. Serendipity once again comes to play. So this is actually kind of a controversial moment in Chicago. Now, at first glance, it's a very pretty moment. It's idyllic. It's got some really pretty color. A lot of things are playing. There's a little bit of drama with the sky. People know Chicago. There's some iconic buildings in here. The bridges, that's a big thing in Chicago. And the bridges are the thing that people either look at this photograph and they see it and they say, oh, this is it's so pretty with the bridges all up. And other people are angered with the bridges all up. And the reason for that is, after the Black Lives Matter protests were happening in Chicago, they made a decision to try to restrict access around the city. They wanted to control. The city made a decision to control movement. And if basically the north side and the south side of the Chicago and the downtown area are separated by the Chicago River. And then a little bit to the west more by the Chicago River the other way it turns. And so the city made a decision to raise the bridges, most of the bridges, because then it restricts how people can move about. And in particular, this was the second weekend of this stuff happening. I did not actually shoot this the first weekend. It happened, but I felt it was so controversial, I wanted to stay away from it. I didn't shoot any of the protests or anything like that. I'm not a news photographer. I figured if anything, I'm simply going to get in the way. It's not my role anymore. And so there's people who are much better at it and have a legitimate reason to be there. And I would just be adding to the mix. And so I opted to not go. But then I went down again. Then I decided, one of my friends kind of talked me into, like, just see it for the pretty pictures. See it for this unique moment. I should preface this. You don't have this. Like, this doesn't happen. We have our sailboats come out each spring and early summer, making their way out of the places where they're dry docked out to the river, out to the lake. This view is looking, if you were to get on a boat and take it out this way, you would eventually get out to Lake Michigan. But normally what happens is when the boats are coming by, they raise the bridge. The boats come by to lower the bridge. They raise the bridge. They don't just open them all up because they would just cut the city in half. So it's a logistics thing. But in this situation, they're almost all up. There's only a couple to create. You have to create some access for ambulances and so on to get across. And so for the most part, it's shut down. Furthermore, we're under a curfew. And I kind of forgot about the curfew. And anyway, so, my thought is, I decided I want sort of this idyllic, pretty moment. And I want to see what this quietness feels like before things start erupting, if you will, again. And so what I ended up doing was I got down there about 35 minutes before sunrise. So it's about 4-something in the morning. And I went to a bridge, the only bridge that was down here, and looking east. And I started framing up the shot, think about the architecture of the space, making sure my verticals are vertical, all those normal things. And so I began framing it up, and I felt like, okay, this is the thing. And I began shooting some blue hour shots. Sunrise hasn't occurred yet. And then I started seeing the clouds coming in, and I thought, oh, these clouds could be interesting. The light could kind of dance here. And so then I ended up shooting with that. And so I have a whole series of this. The feeling really changes, but I ended up liking it. And then interestingly enough, I did post this to people that I know, and I was kind of curious how they'd respond to it. And I was kind of curious if people would respond based on this is an impressive kind of a moment, which is what I'd seen with other photos of the situation. Or would people kind of look past that and sort of say, I get why it happened, but it's still a uniquely beautiful moment in the city in a very visual way, forget about the political backstory. And so that's what it is. And so this is the kind of stuff I'm doing now as I'm exploring the city more, since all the sports things I was doing are on who knows when they're coming back. I've re-engaged the city, and I'm exploring it, and I'm producing work, and I'm beginning to sell prints, and I'm looking at things I'm going to be licensing and so on and so forth, of a variety of things in the city. And this was one because it wasn't just a photo, and I was more curious about how people would respond to it, because there's kind of a duality going on here. On the one hand, it's a pretty idyllic moment. The bridges are neat. They kind of break up the vertical lines. On the other hand, there's a reason for the bridges up. And so I like the fact that there's some kind of tension in this photograph, and I think it'll make people talk. No matter what side of the issue they're on, it'll bring them back to it in some sense and get them to reflect. And I like that.
So I have two questions on this. The first one is very simple. This is a sort of another example of layering, but this time is sort of on a meta level, right?
Sure.
There is some information that if I add that information and I didn't have, I stopped at the first layer. It is a beautiful idyllic picture, right? Because I didn't know that was a way to sort of restrict access in relation to peculiar, a social and political moment. And so I didn't have that information. If I had that, I would have appreciated that picture, appreciated in a sense, I would have understood the picture and its meaning potentially a lot more, and inform different ideas. How do you, and maybe this is an impossible question, how do you ensure that the meaning of this picture can go beyond, obviously, people that are in Chicago are aware what this would mean, and why this could be an aspect that goes beyond an idyllic picture? That's the first one.
Yeah, people's responses to things, they're emotional responses, so that doesn't mean they're necessarily logical. They're like, and the reason when I first realized it was a thing is I looked at a post of the previous weekend where this photograph was featured on one of those curated sites. And, I looked at it and thought, wow, I looked at it in a very visual way, like, that's kind of a cool photo. And then I began looking at the comments, and people were really pissed. And not everybody, but some people were really pissed. Like, take this effing stuff down, and on and on and on. And I was surprised at the response, because I kind of took a step back and I says, look, I know that the city's raising bridges. And I know why they're doing it. I mean, they're doing it to try to protect assets. Like it or not, the city's in a position, they have a response. This is how I interpreted it. They have a response to the business owners who spend, collectively millions of dollars in the city. They have a responsibility to protect them from basically looting and the stuff that happened. Our Michigan Avenue was destroyed. Michigan Avenue was like the big downtown shopping area, and it was just ravaged. And the city has a responsibility to do everything they can to prevent that. They weren't successful in that instance, but they were still trying, without going super violent, they're trying to do something. So this, to me, this is a fairly passive way to try to prevent that. And I could also make the logical argument, look, if you can't get here or there, you can still protest where you want. It's just that it's a chess game of sorts. Okay, they made this move. It's not a violent move. The city made this move. Be clever about it. Don't just complain about, oh, we can't cross these bridges now. You got outsmarted by the city. Your move. That's kind of how I looked at it. Like, no matter what side of the issue you're on, that's what it was. And so how people are going to interpret it, there's probably a million different ways. And if a person were to challenge me on like why I took this photograph, I could probably give a different explanation on different days. How they want to interpret the photograph is up to them. I didn't see it that somebody was being oppressed. I literally saw, what I did is I says, if I were in charge of the city and I realized we have a situation here, I probably would have come to the same conclusion. An effective strategy is to restrict movement. And if we do that, we can maintain control. That's our job as the city, to maintain some sort of control. If you don't like it as a protester, I don't know what to say to that, other than you got outsmarted. That's it. You got outsmarted. So, that would make me an incredibly unpopular person to say that. But the point is, there's two players here, and it's not like one has to acquiesce to the other. People had every right to protest. I believe in a lot of what they're saying. There's certain components of it that I'm troubled with. But at the same time, I can't look at this and say, oh, the city did a terrible thing by cutting people off. No, they just played their hand really well as they could, strategically. They just took advantage of a strategic opportunity they had. I just don't see the problem in that.
Did you post this on sort of social media, right?
Yeah, I posted it. Well, I posted it to my Facebook account.
Right.
And then I think I posted to Instagram as well.
What was not because I want to go into the merit, but what was the response? Was a similar response to
no, that's what's remarkable. I didn't have that. On my particular page, I did not have that kind of a response. And I was prepared for it because I had gone down the weekend before and I had posted a similar version of the photograph where not as many bridges were up. It was kind of an after the math photograph. And I'm like, well, it was one of those, I'm going to salvage a picture day kind of thing. I'm down here. Let me just make this photo. But I wasn't happy with the photo. I was like, it's not a thing. And I realized that we were going to have round 2 of this. And I thought, okay, let me revisit this. And when I went back down there, then I thought, okay, let me just take a look at this. When I posted the first photograph, though, I posted it with the idea to invite discussion. I wanted people to, I get it that some people are like, yay, city. Other people are like, city, you suck. And I'm like, I'm just going to post a photograph. And I wanted to try to get people talking, because I'm a big believer if people are on, the left side of a topic or the right side of the topic, what they're really, really good at is pointing their fingers at each other, vilifying each other, and yelling at each other. What people aren't really good at is finding out what we have in common and then work out from there. And so what I wanted to do is, in this, sad little attempt, was to post this photo, the earlier flavor of this photo, post it, and then get people to talk about it. I was just, because I wanted to invite dialogue. And then if people are going to kind of go off the rails, my attempt was bring them back in and say, hey, I get it, you're not happy with that, but let's try to understand why they did it. Like, I really wanted to find this place where people could understand the other side's perspective. And then when I posted this photograph, because it was a much prettier version, because all the elements came together, there were more bridges up, yada, yada, yada. The water was incredibly still for the most part. I was expecting something, like a continuation of what happened the last go around. And that's how it happened. People are just like, the colors are beautiful. Like, it's so idyllic. Your water is so smooth. When did you do this? Like, I love the light dancing, the sunlight clouds dancing off the buildings on the opposite side and all this sort of stuff. So the dialogue was much more about the aesthetic of the building.
Do you think that they sort of implicitly understood that your desire was not to steer controversy, but to get people talking, but recognize that this is what, both sides have in common, a beautiful place that we want to maintain. And so, let's start from there and how we can continue to keep it that way, that beautiful. And they sense the intention was appreciate the aesthetics, appreciate the common ground. Let's have a dialogue, a civil dialogue about how can we move forward.
Yeah, I doubt it. Honestly, I wish that were true, because I think, I've had enough people post on my images where, their posts can be thoughtful or beyond the cursory, and really much of the stuff was more centered about it was a beautiful morning in an aesthetic way. Like, people were stripping away the reason that the bridges were up, and they were kind of all in on the aesthetic that, Chicago is a beautiful city. We have this beautiful river. You got this canyon kind of thing going on. And that was really it. I was actually hoping that people were that visual tension thing was going to go a little bit further, and people are going to sort of talk about that stuff. And then I was prepared to say things like, you're right. Like, they are up for a reason that might be unpopular. But we can always look at things and we can see the darkness in something, or we can see the light. And I was going to say something like, but I'm choosing to see the light. And I'm not trying to be punny here, but I'm choosing to see the light in the sense that this moment has never occurred, where all the bridges are up like this. They've never had a reason to do it. I happen to be down here at like 4 something in the morning. Now it's probably about 5:30 or so, because the sun's kind of coming up. I think sun was getting up at about 5:15. So I can look at the metadata, but that's about when it is. So it's really early. It was idyllic and peaceful and quiet, and mornings in the city. I've got a thing for like watching the day come alive. Like, when things are still and quiet and peaceful and the energy level is low, and it's like the city is literally just waking up. Now, as it turns out, I wasn't supposed to be allowed to take this photograph because we're under a curfew, and I'm being told I should have been stopped, but there were nobody around. My friend saw this photograph, and he's like, I want to go down and make my version of it on Sunday. Do you want to join me? I says, no, I feel like I've made the photograph I want. I'm good now. I'm not going to go down. And he went down and he called me. He says he got stopped by National Guard, and they wouldn't let him into the city until 6 a.m., which is when the curfew ended for the night. And so as a result, I don't know what the light looked like the next day. He doesn't know what the light looked like the next day because he wasn't allowed to get anywhere near it. So serendipity, man, it's a thing.
Wow. I mean, you have been able to not only live, but to capture so many iconic moments. I want you for a second to sort of look back at your younger self, and what kind of advice would you give that younger self that is sort of about to embark in something that will be punctuated by so many iconic moments that not only you definitely be incredibly proud, and for a good reason. These are incredible shots, but really they sort of set a certain pace in someone's life that not everybody has, and what kind of advice would you give? Would you make any of your choices? Do you do something different, or live exactly the same way you lived? Is there anything that you would change?
Yeah, there's that. Well, yeah, I mean, but hindsight 2020, the cliche comes. So there's certain things like I would have probably shot more commercially early in my career, just because you make more. And it's the economics of it. When I think of it purely as this is a business, and so when I treat it as a business, that's important. But at the same time, a reason I didn't do that is I was doing a lot of work with ESPN the magazine, and they're a great. Well, they were. ESPN still is, but ESPN the magazine, they're gone. The magazine ceased operations in September of last year. But they are a great vehicle for storytelling. And one of the things that I was drawn to early in my career was this idea of using pictures to tell stories, and they were the thing. So I was really all in on that idea, and I really wasn't deviating from it. I have a tendency, like if I really am interested in something, I tend to focus on that thing a lot, and so that's what it was. And even though I could shoot for brands and things like that, I really wanted to do the storytelling thing. But the reality of the situation is I probably should have had better balance, because storytelling just provides economic opportunities that commercially shooting provides opportunities that editorial. No, everybody knows you're not making a ton of money on the editorial side. Now, if you're working for things like Sports Illustrated and ESPN, you tend to be doing much better than average. But by nature, editorial is a more challenging place. And so really, if you're really smart economically, you're finding a mix between commercial work and editorial work. And so you can kind of feed the two different demons you have, or the two different angels. The one which is I just need to be able to afford the gear, which never gets cheaper. But at the same time, I don't want to just make images to sell things as well, that I want to find a balance. And then on the flip side, there's oftentimes when you're shooting storytelling kind of images, you've got that sort of photojournalistic feel to them, that can reinform how you shoot certain things commercially, where those things can feel a bit more authentic. They feel more organic. They feel like real moments. And so those things can feed each other. And that's probably the one thing that I would have done differently, because when I did do that, it was freeing in a way that I didn't anticipate. Not to mention the fact that sometimes I enjoyed the control of being on a commercial set where we're creating something from the ground up, whereas normally I'm responding. If I'm on the storytelling side, I'm not directing the story. I'm responding to the story as it comes to me. And sometimes it's actually nice to sort of test ideas, because I could also create an awareness if I'm shooting something commercially about that looks really cool when it happened that way. And then I can think on the storytelling side about being aware if that kind of situation occurs over there. So my senses get heightened on both sides. I'm making even more money. I'm busier because there's only so many stories you're telling. There's so many opportunities to shoot. And so you're just busy. So there's like no downside. And the more you work at this craft in different kind of ways, I believe the better you get in all the different ways. Like if you shoot sports all the time, and you don't shoot other stuff, and then if you shoot sports and you throw other things into it, I think that second scenario makes you an overall better photographer. I absolutely 100% believe that. I think you pay attention to things that a typical sports guy might not see. For example, anyways, I can go way down that path. I'll just stop.
I mean, it was, I didn't want to stop you. There's so much, I have a feeling that you will have to come back on the show. There will be probably more questions and more, there's not enough time. And I am just personally enjoying so much. And I'm like, I know that we are now towards the end, and I'm like, I wish I had more time. Right. So that will be definitely a part two. Ross, it was an incredible conversation. That there's so much that you provided so much value and so many incredible moments. I mean, I'm still okay, this is great. Like now that I even have the context, it makes those pictures even more vivid and more vibrant in my head. Where can people find you on the internet and can sort of enjoy many more of these beautiful shots?
So to be fair, I haven't really been updating my website as much as I should. It's just my name, rossdettman.com.
Okay.
And it's because a colleague and I are going to be doing a complete rebuild on it in the next couple of months. And so I was like, and quite frankly, nobody's hiring anyone right now anyways. But I'm really changing the visual direction. But they can go look. They can definitely get a glimpse. There's a bunch of old ESPN stuff in there. So you can definitely get a glimpse of who I am at Ross Dettman. So ROSSDETTMAN.com. And then the more current things, I'm kind of grabbing some of my old sports work, and I've created, there's Ross Dettman underscore sport on Instagram, and then Ross Dettman on Instagram. And what I've done now is I've separated those. I used to kind of, my Instagram was just all kind of mixed. And I realized people want a fairly consistent viewing experience. So Ross Dettman now is pretty much all my pretty pictures. So Chicago, as I'm sort of exploring the city and things of that nature, that's become a repository for that. And then Ross Dettman Sport is where I'm going to be kind of digging into my archive, because in sports right now, that's almost all you can do. And I'm just grabbing some select moments there where they just seem appropriate, or maybe it's a moment of somebody who knows what that moment is, recognizing that's a big thing. So I'm kind of digging through my archive and having some fun, kind of looking back on things, some things I probably shot, 7-8 years ago. But it's fun to look back at them and bring them out for people. One, to remind the people on the sports side, people are like complaining about sports not here, but kind of give them something to reflect on, and the good old days until the good new days come along.
Brilliant. Well, I will add all of this into the description of the video. So hopefully people will find out about this two Instagram account and your site, and see, maybe in a couple of months how that site changed. Ross, this has been fantastic. As I said, thank you so much for spending an hour with me. I enjoyed immensely. So thanks a lot.
I appreciate that. This was so much fun. I could do this for another 2 hours.
Brilliant. Well, just save yourself. There will definitely be a part two. Thank you so much.
Okay. Have a great day.